Today on Energy Contact, much of what we need to know about our psyche can be determined by looking at our hips, and your shrink probably doesn't even know it. So today, we're looking at our butts. I'm not kidding. We're looking at what it means if our rear end pooches out or curves in, what it has to do with how we think and how we feel. So think about taking a seat where you'll be comfortable for the next half hour, because that's what's coming up right now on Energy Contact.
Gonna worry and I ain't gonna complain. I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping and I'll keep my mind on better things. He ain't gonna worry and I ain't gonna complain. I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping and I'll keep my mind on better things. Just keep my mind on better things.
Hello, and welcome to Energy Contact. My name is Joseph Willenbrink. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you to the production staff here in the studio for helping me get my message out to you. Energy Contact is a series that I'm presenting to you as a public service. It's about attaining perfect health, growth, happiness, self-improvement, and realizing your full potential. It's designed to present you a new way of looking at yourself and a new way of looking at the world around you. We're talking about things that have to do with making an energetic contact with your environment and with yourself internally. There's no difference between the body, the mind, the spirit, the emotion, the intellect, the ego. There's no difference between mass and energy. These things are all exactly the same. There is something about us that just loves to categorize, classify, separate, divide things out, take one little piece, put it under a microscope, and think we know the big picture. In fact, all that health and self-improvement we're talking about take place when we do just the opposite. It happens when we put these things together, when we make an energetic contact between the physical world and the unseen one. We're talking today about a brand new paradigm that's thousands of years old. We're talking about extraordinary topics for ordinary people. And let's move right ahead with that. Let's bring up our first slide. Everyone please know that I am not a doctor. This show, it's not a medical show, it's not a medical advice show, a medical talk show, a medical help show, anything like that. It couldn't be further from it. Now, I might call myself an energy healer, or a chakra healer, things like that. So might you if you came to me. But state, federal, and local governments absolutely do not. And it's important that you know that. There's a lot of important stuff on your screen right now. Please read all of that, if you will, with your full attention. But when you've got it down, now would be a great time to locate a pencil. Here's why you want to do that. At the end of this show, we're going to run some credits. And on those credits, there's going to be contact information for me. Now, I invite and encourage you to contact me. I'm hoping something I have to say today might inspire you to want to do that. But in order to contact me, you're going to need to have that pencil ready. All right, let's come back up here. Today is episode number 12 of Energy Contact. And if you're tuning in for the first time today, well, thank you. Thanks and welcome. These shows are sequential. They build. We're talking about things today that we've explained and introduced and defined previously. So there's some ramp-up things, some up-to-speed stuff that you will have missed out on. However, I'm doing my very best to make sure that every program has a lot of value on a standalone basis. So you'll get plenty out of today's program all by itself. If, however, what you see piques your interest, well, then I'll invite and encourage you to look around, because there will be earlier programs airing at later times, either re-airing right here on this station or on in different days and different times in different areas. And if you look for them, I'll appreciate it. All right, and now it's the part of the program where I get to introduce my co-host to you. This is my buddy Slim right here, and Slim is here for a reason. Since we're investigating what it is that the energy contacts in the physical self, we have to know a couple of things about a couple of things, don't we? We have to know something about energy, and this show is all about energy. That's what we're talking about. But all of that energy out there somewhere does us no good whatsoever. It does us no good until we bring it into focus, until we bring it into contact with something. My pal Slim here is here to help us understand what that thing is that the energy contacts. Remember, A body without energy is just a corpse. And energy without a body, well, it might be a number of cool things, but none of them are human. Okay, previously on Energy Contact, we have been looking at the body intellect and the anatomy that it builds, how thought builds anatomy. We've looked at all those little things in our brain, those little gizmos and switches and chemicals and things that give us thought, reason, recall, memory, logic, intellect, all those things. We were always told they were brain things. But we've seen that in fact, they're in every cell of our body. They permeate every cell of our body. They saturate us. We started at conception as one cell, and that one cell divided into an identical pair. And of those, they divided into identical pairs. And of those cells, one went to our brain, one went to our belly, one went to our feet. Identical cells, same information, different places. We've seen that we are made up of atoms that are all identical and cells that are all individual. But those atoms, and therefore those cells, and therefore you and I, are mostly holes and empty space. So that's all started in the womb. And then out here in the bigger world, we've seen that we have bones that shape us, muscles that shape bones, and that they are both shaped by thought. We looked at our bones and we saw our main horizontal and vertical structures, our pelvis and our spine. Then we looked at our muscles and we saw that they do not know how to push. They only pull and release. So we've been learning a lot, huh? We've been learning something about what it means to be alive. And we've seen that life occurs within a series of forces. Internal forces that animate us, breath and pulse, frequency, rave, rhythm, things like that. And we've seen external forces, the things that out here that push and pull us around, the bumps and bruises, the kisses and hugs of life. Now through all this, and in conjunction with that body intellect, we set up our strengths and we set up our weaknesses. 1 million different people will respond to the same bump or the same hug in 1 million different ways. We've been talking about primal things, instinctual things, breathing and body functions, the pelvis and the psoas. And that brings us to today where we're staying in touch with our core. Specifically today at the structure of our bodies and what it has to do with the structure of our thoughts and our feelings. And we're looking at the tools that the body intellect uses to structure us. We're seeing today how your body is built in discrete sections and how all of these sections connect to each other and how they ultimately connect to the core. We'll see the effect of deviations in the way we build and hold our pelvis and our core today. We're going to see what our physical core has to do with our spiritual core. And if you've been watching a while, you know they're pretty much the same thing. We're going to see what all these things say about us. So today, we're understanding more about our spiritual selves by looking at our deep anatomy. And that's where we're headed today. But first, we've arrived at the part of the program where we get to stop for a second, take a breath and take a break, because we've arrived at the place where we get to take our virtual field trip, our journey in our mind's eye. And for today's field trip, we're going to visit an office, just some white-collar work environment. It doesn't matter what type of company. And we're going to eavesdrop on a conversation. We're in a manager's office, and another manager walks in with some paperwork. And he says, "Have you seen this report? What do you think about it?" The other guy answers, "Well, I think it's pretty routine for the most part. How do you feel?" The first guy says, "Well, I think so, except for this section. I've been thinking long and hard about it, and I just don't think I can agree with it." The other guy says, "Well, funny you should mention that. I share your feelings. It's the only part that I have strong feelings about." "Yes," says the first guy, "that's what I think." Hold that thought. Today we're looking at how we think and how we feel, and what it has to do with our hips, and what it has to do with how we act and how we look. If we're integrated, we do a lot of both, don't we? We do a lot of thinking and feeling. But most of us favor one side or the other. We tend to be right-brained or left-brained, just the same way that we tend to be right-handed or left-handed. People who think more tend to feel less, and people who feel more tend to think less. Furthermore, all of us tend to stop thinking, at least in the analytical basis, at a time when we're emoting a lot, when we have a lot of emotional or sentimental things going on. And all of us stop emoting, we stop feeling when we're involved with something that's really analytical. The mind can't really do both at once. Now, a few shows ago, we discussed breath, and it led us to look at our psoas muscle. Last show, we looked at our core, the structure of it, and we discussed our psoas muscle. This program, however, we're not looking at those things, at least not per se. Today we're looking at the structure of thoughts and feelings and bodies and how it shapes our hips and body sections. So bring up that first slide and you'll see that today we are looking at our psoas muscle. Actually, right now, our psoas and our pelvis. That pelvis there is our bowl of guts, and that psoas holds that bowl upright, more or less. The pelvis is what holds our spine, by the way, which holds the ribs, which contains the heart and the lungs and all of that stuff. That psoas provides balance by moving through us diagonally. Like all muscles, it works like cables do on a suspension bridge. It enables our pelvis to hold all the guts and goo that it holds in there, all that core safely in that bowl-like structure that you see. That psoas keeps our pelvis perched on our legs and then keeps our spine perched on our pelvis. Now that psoas muscle is unique for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that it goes across 3 body sections. Now wait a minute, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. What does that term mean, body sections? Well, to understand that, we're going to need to return to the womb for a few moments and see how we form ourselves. Let's go right to that next slide. What you see here, these drawings are of our cells in the very early days of our formation in the womb, just after conception. Now on the top left there, you see the complexity of information in one cell. Perhaps that's the single cell at conception that eventually becomes all of you. Then on the other side of the top there, you see what happens as that cell divides into an identical pair. Now that bottom row shows us that cells become clusters, and clusters become tissues, and tissues become sections. Look at that the one in the, the right corner there. You start to see body sections developing. The body longs to differentiate, to breathe, to pulsate, to make holes and pockets and space. So, in the past, we've seen that atoms are mostly holes and cells are mostly atoms. And now that we've seen that when these cells cluster together, they do so to make holes, to make empty place. They make pockets that eventually become the sections of us. And you can see that on this next slide. Let's move ahead. Eventually we get out here and we look like these guys here. You see those big circles on that fellow on the right side of your screen there. That's how biologists see us, as a set of stacked cavities. Cavities inside cavities. Holes that contain more holes. All discrete, all the same thing, yet somehow all separate from each other. Now, you can see the abdominal and thoracic cavities on that fellow on the right, and they're separated by the diaphragm muscle. That's important. We're built like a snowman. Your body intellect just sort of manufactures all your different components separately and then assembles them later, like sub-assemblies in a factory assembly line. Over on the other side, our complete fellow there, our muscle dude, you can see that we've drawn the black lines for our discrete components over the top of him. It's a little crude, but you can see that. And you can see from the bottom up, there's that leg section separated from the torso by the pelvis and the pelvic floor. And then there's the abdominal cavity, separated from the next layer by the diaphragm. And then the thoracic cavity, the cavity on the top, represented by the blue stuff on the other side. And the chest, which is defined by the diaphragm below and the shoulders above. And then we've got our head and arms coming out of that. So keep that in mind as we come back up here. In our first days in the womb, we're clusters of pockets and cavities and holes and spaces. And you know what? We still are. Now remember, we're interested in all this in the context of our core, finding out what our hips do with our structure. And so the most important abdominal section, perhaps completely the most important, but certainly for our conversation today, is that abdominal cavity. While that abdominal cavity, let me get my spine model up here. It is where this main vertical, the abdominal cavity is right here, so it's where this main vertical structure sort of seats in, literally and figuratively, to this main horizontal part. The psoas muscle, see if I can get my psoas muscle out here. We'll represent it by this rubber band here. It sort of goes like that. I just broke my psoas. We'll roll with it. But it goes through here, and what it does is it keeps this pelvis muscle here from going too far this way. If it's too loose, it'll tip this way. And if it's too tight, it'll tip that way. And that's important. We're going to come back and see that. Again, notice that that has a bowl shape to it. We're going to come back that too. Plug up a few holes in that pelvis, and you'll see a bowl. We've been calling it the bowl of guts and goo, and that's what it is. But we're going to think of it as a bowl of water. We want the psoas to hold that bowl so that water neither spills out the front nor spills out the back. Let's see if we can get Slim in here a little bit, and we'll look at it in his section. Here you can see what happens if we plug up the bowl. And again, if that pelvis were to tip too far this way, water would spill out the side of the bowl. And if it would tip too far this way, it would spill out the front of the bowl. I'll put Slim's tie back on him here, and we'll move ahead with that. Very few other muscles cross these distinct body sections. In other words, most of our 630 some odd muscles are intra-section muscles. They stay in one of those separate components. They attach one to another, but they pretty much stay out of each other's compartments. That's what makes the psoas so different. In other words, our leg muscles sort of come, move Slim's tie a little bit better, come up to here and they stop. Our abdomen muscles come down to here and they stop. They don't cross those sections. Well, the psoas muscle not only crosses one of them, it crosses a couple, as we'll see. By the way, our bones tend to stay in this section too. Our spine is the notable exception to that, which is one of the reasons, probably the main reason, that it's our main vertical structure. All right, let's take up our next slide, and we're going to see how all of this fits together on our muscle man there. Notice our pal that in addition to the highlighted body cavities, there's two little diagonal things going on right in his body. Two little cucumber-shaped things there. Those represent the psoas muscle. Now, like we mentioned, that psoas muscle crosses not only one section, but two. We think of it as an abdominal muscle, but its main connections are not in the abdomen. It attaches in the leg section just below the abdomen. You can see that on the psoas close-up, and up right through the diaphragm and in the thoracic section on the top. So what, you're thinking? Well, so what? That means that this is the muscle that holds us together. It provides our structure. It keeps the top of us from walking away from the bottom of us. It holds our legs onto the body, holds the top of us onto the bottom of us. Now remember, that psoas muscle not only does that, but it controls the degree of pivot in our pelvis. Let's come back up here. That pivot is what holds the water in the bowl, hopefully. And we're going to examine that bowl of water in a few ways. Here's one way to look at it. I'm going to get out my razor that we looked at. Whoops, that's not my razor. There we go. Get out my razor that we looked at a few shows ago. We want to see how this razor is sort of similar to your pelvis and your spine. You can think of this handle here as your spine, and this razor part, the shaver part, we'll get in a little closer perhaps, and you can see how that pivot there mimics your pelvis. Now, this really isn't correct because technically our energy comes up from the bottom, but I want you to notice that swivel. Now, all the razors you buy these days are all pivoting razors because they work better. Pivoting razors work better than frozen ones, and the same goes for your pelvis. Pivoting pelvises work better, but that amount of pivot needs to be managed. You can look at it this way. If we allowed too much pivot on that razor, imagine when I shaved my face, if there was too much pivot here, this thing would just flop all the way over. Can you see how that, you know, there'd be no blade on my face. Now imagine it was fixed, but imagine it was fixed too far this way. Then I'd have to try to shave like this, or if it was fixed too far this way, I'd have to shave like this. You can see how each of these deviations sets up a different dysfunction. All right, Our psoas is just like that. It has to allow motion. Enough of it, but not too much. That psoas can tilt too far up and too far back. Indeed, it does on a lot of people. We're going to see that in a second. And if the angle of pitch in our pelvis isn't just right, our torso center of balance ends up being in front of us or in back of us, which ends up causing all sorts of problems. That, again, imagine that bowl of water. That would cause the water to spill out of one side of the bowl or the others. Okay, so let's bring up our next slide, and we're going to look at that in a little bit of detail here. In some of us, the psoas holds the pelvis backwards so that the liquid would pour out of the back of the bowl. This guy's pelvis is tilted too far back so that the water would pour out the back. And that says a lot physically, but even more emotionally. Now, either men or women can have this build, but we're showing you here as sort of the classic example of the anal retentive male. See how flat his lower back is? See how, can you imagine how rigid that makes him? This gentleman here is intellect oriented. He sees detail at the expense of the big picture. This is the body of a thinker, not a feeler. He's emotionally detached. He's dissociated. His center of balance is behind him. His feet enter the room first. He's anal retentive. He's clean and orderly. He's upright and uptight. Now this fella keeps his word. He's trustworthy, but he's also a little judgmental, a little dogmatic and legalistic, often religiously so. Perhaps he lives in a world of shoulds and shouldn'ts and ought tos and ought nots, and good people don't and bad people do, and stuff like that. What this fellow's hips tell you is that he tends to repress sexual energy. He has trouble with intimacy or sentimentality of any kind. He'll express his good feelings towards you by doing you a favor. All right, let's come back up here. Now, if you know somebody that looks like that fellow, I probably described him a little bit. Now, there's a lot of physical things related to this build too, but today we're just interested in building an emotional profile. To see what this is like, to see what this feels like, stand up and thrust, mimic the move, thrust your hips forward like that, and walk around a little bit. Sometime when you've got time, walk around that way for an hour or so. See how holding your hips in that position makes your spine feel. See how it makes your low back feel, how it makes your legs feel, how it makes all the muscles in that area. Then see what kind of mood that it puts you in. And then imagine you're that way all the time. Now hold that thought, because we're about to check out the other extreme. And when we do, I'll advise you to do that same exercise again, and you'll see what effect that has. But if you do one of those two exercises, and one way doesn't make you feel much different than usual, well, then you know what kind of hips you have. All right, let's bring up that next slide and take a look at it. Here you see the other extreme. Look at these folks here. Their pelvises tip too far forward so that the liquid would pour out the front of the bowl. Can you see where the low back and the hips meet? There's almost a right angle there. That curves the lower spine and it makes the rear end pooch out. It yields a sway back, a duck butt. Now either men or women can have this build too, but the classic example is what we'll call the self-objectifying woman. High heels, for example, are designed to accentuate this look. Now in the extreme, this is the woman who walks out on the Venice Beach sidewalk in a thong bathing suit and complains about how people just always look at her butt. This backwards pelvis pitch yields overdeveloped thighs and a pot belly often. This person naturally is heavier at the bottom and smaller at the top. She needs to do that just to retain balance. Nowadays, this build can be obscured by breast implants, and this is precisely the person who's most inclined to go get them. But implants or not, her body weight, her center of balance is balanced in front of her. Her face enters the room first. So she needs to be a little bottom heavy. She needs her rear end more behind her in order to maintain balance. All right, let's come up here. So this person is feeling oriented. She's a feeler more than a thinker. She sees the big picture, but she gets lost in the details. She loses focus. She's spacey. And while she's very feeling oriented, her feelings disappoint her. That's how she's built herself. That's how she's set herself up. Now that person can be sloppy and disorganized, undependable, but creative, sensitive, accepting at the right place. She might be a little rebellious. thrill-seeking, but not for ideological reasons usually, not for intellectual reasons. That person has a heightened sexual focus, but also a sexual frustration, a non-fulfillment. Not only that, but she tends to sexualize the intentions of others. You know what I mean? That's the person you go up and you say, "Pardon me, miss, do you know what time it is?" And she's, "Oh, you're not going to get me with a pickup line like that, buddy." All right. Does society objectify women? It's a deep subject to get into this late in the show, but the answer is obviously yes. But it's at least partly because women are the partners in their own objectification. They're complicit. Now you might be thinking, Joseph, this objectification you're talking, it's just a product of modern times. It might be a product of marketing, and it might be just modern fashion, and just in the United States only, by the way. Well, let's see. Let's bring up that next slide. These women here, like many women today, go out of their way. They spend hours of preparation looking in the mirror to make themselves look objectifiable. And then the woman we saw previously complain about being so, perhaps. All right, let's come up here again. Okay, so you probably know somebody that looks like my two extreme examples. But while it's important to observe other people, and while you can learn a lot about it, what we really want to do is look at yourself. If you're a strong thinker, so that you have second thoughts about those feelers because they aren't logical and because you can't figure them out, what does that say about you? Well, the answer is it says plenty. What about the other side? What if you think of yourself as a strong feeler so that you get a bad feeling about those emotionless analytical types? What does that say? Well, that says plenty too. But we can change. The goal is to be balanced. To change our structure, we have to change our core. We have to change our core ideas and feelings, but also our physical core. To change that bowl, to change that core, we have to change our psoas and the muscles of the pelvic floor. And in order to do that, we need to lose a little bit of the hysteria that we have about that part of our body. So changing our body will change our spiritual and emotional self, and vice versa. And that's what we're going to look at more next time. But for today, we're out of time. Thank you for joining me. I wish you peace and positive energy and a healthy life from Energy Contact.
Drive away all these doubts I've been keeping and keep my mind on better things.